Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of Inside Inter Miami. As you see, I am not Andre Fernandez. I am Michelle Kaufman. Andre is out. He's off this week, and so I am not really solo. I have a very special guest that I am the host, though, but I have a very special guest today to help us break down this big game that's coming up Wednesday night between Inter Miami and Monterrey, the Champions Cup quarterfinal deciding leg on and off the field. So much drama with this game. And I figured I wanted to find the perfect person to break this down and explain to us what to expect. And and I found the perfect person. The perfect person is Herculez Gomez. Herculez Gomez, for those who don't know, I'm sure most of you do, uh, he's been on both sides of this fence. He grew up in the United States, but Mexican American, played for LA Galaxy, Seattle Rapids, Wizards, and then went over to Mexico and has played for pretty much every team. I'm so sorry. Played for every single team, it seems like, except Monterrey. Played for Puebla, Pachuca, Tecos, Tijuana. I made a list. Santos Laguna, Tigres. Basically, this guy he knows Liga MX and he knows MLS like nobody's business. And for many years now, since his retirement, has been one of the top commentators on ESPN. Also, I'm going to throw in a plug for his show. He does a show with Sebastian Salazar called Football Americas. That's on ESPN Plus. I'll mention that a few times throughout the show. Make sure people listen to this show, but also listen to his show. So, first of all, I just wanted to ask you, just for background and so people can get to know you a little bit before we dive into this game. Um, Tell us a little about your background and when you are Mexican American growing up in the United States, the pull between, rooting for American soccer, MLS versus Liga MX. Which one do little kids want to play in? What's the dream? And just sort of tell us your story a little bit.
Michelle, first of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you having me on. It's interesting because you talk about that pool, and that pool really does exist. There's a famous line in an old movie called Selena. Jennifer Lopez, she played Selena, and it's Selena's father talking about how exhausting it is to be Mexican American. You've got to be more Mexican than the Mexicans. You got to prove to be more American than the Americans, and you've got this constant tug of war and pull. That's what it was like being Mexican American in this setting, because there's a massive rivalry. I don't want to date myself, but growing up, Major League Soccer wasn't around. It came into existence in 1996. I want to say 14 years old in 1996, heading into high school. And it was nowhere near the picture, but I was very fortunate that even though I'm from Vegas, I was born in Southern California, and I grew up in an area that was very rich in football and soccer. And out of the area in Southern California, you have players like Kobe Jones, you have players like Marcelo Balboa, Eric Winalda, guys that I used to grow up watching. But I also had, because of my parents, my father, who was a massive football fan, grew up watching the Luis Garcias, the Sagues, the Cuauhtemoc Blancos, Mexican soccer. So you get a little bit of a rich understanding of what it meant on both sides. And it really wasn't until the 2000s that this even became competitive. And I'm talking about on a national scale. The Landon Donovans coming about, the DeMarcus Beasleys, and the Dos Aceros kind of blossoming, and this really becoming a rivalry. In Major League Soccer, all of a sudden starting to kind of come out of its shell and doing well internationally. DC United and what they did, the LA Galaxy, and I'm talking about in this same competition. Granted that the format was different and a lot has changed, but growing up Mexican American was always that constant pull. And well, I had a fruitful career. You mentioned the teams I played for is 17 years. And in that time, I do have a very good understanding of the landscape here in the States and Major League Soccer and what that entails, even some Canadian history. I played for Toronto FC, but also Liga MX, and what it means to be kind of in the middle of that. And what I mean by that is I was fortunate to play for the U.S. men's national team and play against Mexico. So I experienced that rivalry, but I was also fortunate enough to play on both sides of this rivalry at the club level, for a couple clubs in Major League Soccer in this CONCACAF Champions Cup, and for a couple clubs in Liga MX for for this competition. And the same things are said. The same things are said on both sides. You just change the flag, you change the language, but the same things are said. And it's interesting how this rivalry continues to evolve. Uh, but long story short, I've got a very strong understanding of this tournament.
And so, tell us about Monterrey. What that is one of the, it's one of the top clubs. It's like a lot of fan favorite type, kind of like a Dallas Cowboys type, team where it has a big following in Mexico. Tell us a little bit about what is Monterrey known for? How big of a club is it for those who are just sort of learning about the rivalry? Tell us about what Inter Miami is facing here with Monterrey,
All right.
especially there with their fans in Monterrey at that stadium with 55,000 people.
Yeah, so Monterrey is interesting. I'll break down Mexican football in one way: old money and new money. The traditional powers, the Chivas de Guadalajara, the Club Americas, those are your, the Cruz Azul, the Pumas. Those are your traditional powers in Mexican football. Those would be like the, if you will, the Cowboys, the Steelers, the Niners type of deal. And then you have Los Regios. And when I say Los Regios, that's a concentrated part in northern Mexico. In Monterrey, it's two teams: uh, Monterrey, Rayados de Monterrey, which in Miami will be facing, and Tigres, which actually Columbus is facing. Those are the new money. Those would be like the New England Patriots, the teams that all of a sudden have had success in the past couple of decades, and very rich success because of the money, because they have an economic power that most don't have in Mexico. So you're facing off against Rayados de Monterrey, which many would consider one of the richest rosters in all Latin America, one of the richest rosters in on this side of the continent, and certainly when you talk about CONCACAF, they're on a field of their own. You go down the list of their players, their roster 1 through 30, you'd be hard pressed to find better names, better rosters, richer resumes. That's who you're facing today. That's who is Inter Miami has to deal with, and their fans. It's a funny thing with their fans because they're very cold in the sense that they will support the team when things are going well, but they're quick to demand and kind of turn their back on their team. And it's very interesting what I'm hearing and seeing out of Monterrey is it's a city that's divided by two teams. And if you're a Rayado fan, you'll be there cheering your team. But Inter Miami has now kind of taken over Tigre fans who want to go see Messi, who want to go see Luis Suarez, who want to go see Jordi Alba, who want to go see this team. And they're snatching up Inter Miami jerseys, and they're going to be at the stadium, and they're trying to support Messi, support Inter Miami. One, because he's a global icon, but two, because they hate Rayados. Like, the rivalry is that big. So it'll be an interesting setting come Wednesday night, but it's going to be a good game for many factors. New money meets the new hype.
Right. Well, this is new money too. I mean, really, it's sort of two teams with new money because Inter Miami couldn't be much newer and couldn't have much more money. I mean, Miami has the richest roster in MLS, and it is new money. We're talking about all four of these guys we just mentioned. Messi, Suarez, Busquets, Jordi Alba. These all just came since July of not even 1 year. This team has not. These big names have not been here even 1 year. So again, it's sort of a new money Liga MX versus new money MLS playing against each other. Two teams that clearly have stars, have the marquee power. If you were to put a marquee up, there would be a lot of names on that marquee for this name and for this game. And I find it interesting you were talking about the Tigres fans. I hadn't thought about that, just how, because I did notice today Rayados put something on their Twitter, like instructions for the game for the fans from Rayados, and it said specifically to wear Rayados shirts. And they're being very, stressing that they want people coming to this game to be rooting for Rayados because, as has been the case in every other place that Messi has played, with
Yeah.
Inter Miami. There is a large contingent, whether it's New York Red Bull Arena, whether it's in Nashville, whether it's, everywhere but Cincinnati, I have to say, of the visiting teams, the visiting games that I've gone to, the only one where the stadium was still almost all the home fans was Cincinnati. But all the other ones that I've been to, there was a very large number. In DC, there was a huge number of people in pink. In New York, there was a large number of people in pink. In Nashville, there was a large number of people in pink. I know in Dallas there was. So it'll be interesting to see how much pink do we see, and how much pink are we going to see at that stadium in Monterrey? What do you think the percentage will be?
That's a great question. Now, I'll give you the example of Tigres. Tigres across the town, across in Monterrey, obviously their colors are yellow, so you see yellow in every single home game, and they've got a 95% season ticket holder contingency. So only 5% of ticket sales are actually available to the general public every game. That's not the case with Rayados. Rayados has a bigger stadium and more of a fickle crowd, and to my understanding, they're experiencing something in Mexico that we usually don't see, and that's a secondary ticket market. We're used to seeing that here in the States. We're used to Ticketmaster, StubHub, all these systems that offer third-party ticket sales. So you see these crazy numbers being thrown out there for. I'm here in Los Angeles, and they play LAFC, they play the Galaxy. Tickets are going for $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000, or sometimes it's if it's a suite, tens of thousands of dollars to go see Messi. That doesn't happen in Mexico. You don't really see that secondary ticket market. You're seeing that right now with Rayados. So it's going to be very difficult to tell you a percentage. What I can say and what I will say is never in the history of this game in Mexico have you seen an icon of that level. Now, sure, you've had international stars like Bebeto, who have played in Liga MX, Ronaldinho, who played in Liga MX, and they'll move the needle, and that'll get people to go, curiosity, but not of this magnitude. So, one, it'll be very interesting to see what the ticket sales are like. Two, the percentage, and three, the security. This is unlike anything we've ever seen when it comes to this market. I'm glad it's in this stadium. I'm glad it's in this city because I do think they are more prepared than most cities would be. So it'll be very interesting.
Yeah, I did see. I did see.
I
By the
don't
way,
really know what to say to that.
yeah, I did see in the same instruction sheet that they gave out on Twitter from Monterrey, from Rayados, it also said in red, they had red in bold that anybody who invades the pitch, anybody who runs onto the field will be arrested. They had a very clear banner, red banner on that instruction sheet that said, if you run onto the field, you will be arrested. Just this past game here against Colorado Rapids this past Saturday, two young people, one a young girl and one a young man, both ran onto the field and had to be taken off the field. That is what happens. It seems like whenever Messi plays, or a lot of times, there are people who try to run onto the field, and that I'm glad to hear you say that stadium is a little bit more prepared, that
Yes,
they have more
it's state of the
security
art.
because
It's state of the art,
yeah.
Michelle. Here's my the people in Mexico are some of the most faithful, loyal, passionate fans you can see, and it's a shame that there are a few, ruin it for the majority. But the general security measures for some of these outdated stadiums are the moats around the field, which are massive pits where if you jump the stadium, the stands trying to get onto the field, you end up in a ditch. You end up in this massive moat. That's not the case in the state-of-the-art stadium. But they've never seen a superstar like Messi come here. So it's going to be a massive test, and one that I think not only eyes of CONCACAF will be on, but FIFA itself. Don't forget, this is going to be a World Cup stadium in 2026. So I'm sure that Gianni Infantino and the people of FIFA will be very interested in how they handle a game of this magnitude. Um, you know, from what I've seen from the people of Rayados and the people of Monterrey and everything, it's a first-class organization, and they'll be thoroughly prepared. But this is unlike anything they've ever seen.
Yeah, yeah. And then on top of that, I mean, adding fuel to the, I've been calling it a spicy rivalry here, that's developed is the off-field drama that happened after the game the other night. Now, there's no video of it, but there are, reports from some credible media, that there was, and Rayados did file a complaint with CONCACAF that there was an argument, a heated argument, I will say. There were no punches thrown or anything like that, but there was a heated argument in the hallway between the two locker rooms after the game last Wednesday. And, some of the stuff that's come out is pretty ugly. There was what supposedly happened, I'm sure by now anyone who's following this podcast and following this team and this rivalry already sort of knows. But basically, to summarize, after the game last week, which Miami lost, after they lost, Messi was very upset. Messi did not play, but he was at the stadium. And he was very upset. He was very upset that David Ruiz got thrown off, and Miami was down to 10 men, and upset that, they had 7 yellow cards, and Rayados had 3. But basically, what all started was that the Rayados coach, Fernando Ortiz, before the game, days before the game, basically insinuated that the officiating was going to be tilted toward Miami because Messi's on the team. And he said, look, let's face it, soccer's a business, and Messi is on that team, and it's about money. And we are not, our team is not going to be the one that's going to be favored in that circumstance. It's going to be the team that has Messi. It's going to be the team that has money. And so he said, we're going to do what we can on the field, but we have no idea what's going to happen off the field, and we can't control what happens off the field. Basically saying that the officiating would be slanted toward Miami. As it happens, Miami is the one that ended up getting all the yellow cards and getting a man thrown off, and ended up losing the game after going ahead. Ends up losing the game because they made 2 defensive errors, but also they were down a man at the end of the game. And so uh, Leo Messi was apparently upset after the game, as were a few of his teammates, Luis Suarez, Jordi Alba, and even Tata. And apparently in the hallway, it's a very narrow hallway in that stadium. Chase Stadium it's a temporary stadium. There isn't really any room between the 2 locker rooms. And normally, for a normal MLS game, between Inter Miami and Columbus Crew or whatever, you're not going to really have a problem. But when you've got a Champions Cup quarterfinal controversial ending with a sending off with an expulsion of a player, and tempers are at a heightened tempers, they're all converging in one little hallway. The referees and both teams. And apparently, according to reports, Messi confronted their coach, Tano Ortiz, and basically started, said basically like, that he heard what he had said, and la la la, and started arguing, and they had a heated argument. And then one of the assistant coaches has
Nico
now come
Sanchez.
out.
Yes.
There's an audio that leaked, not a video, but an audio that leaked of him telling someone about what happened, and saying that, used the word, which is horrible, but said, the dwarf, meaning Messi, that the dwarf was so mad that he wanted to punch him, that he wanted to hit him, and that he had the face of a devil, that he was so upset that he had the face of a devil. Those are words you do not hear in relation to when someone is talking about Lionel Messi. This is, this is the God, this is the Messiah, this is the goat, this is the golden goose. People don't talk that way about him. So obviously, this is a very very hot situation that's going on off the field. Inter Miami has not said a word. CONCACAF has not said a word. Everything has been coming from Rayados. They did release a statement saying that they did file a complaint with CONCACAF. They wanted some sort of sanctions before this next game. CONCACAF has not said anything. They've not even acknowledged that they received a report. Inter Miami, nothing. The only thing that Tata Martino said when asked about it twice in the press conference the other night after the Colorado game was, he said, I am not getting involved in this telenovela. He says, we are here to play soccer. We're going to play Monterrey. We have the return leg coming up on Wednesday there. We know it's going to be a tough game. We are focusing on the game. We're not focusing on the telenovela. So I'm just curious about your take about all of this stuff that has happened in the last week surrounding this game
Mm.
before we even talk about what to expect on the field.
All right. You say there's no video, which is very interesting because every stadium in Major League Soccer has a video system. So I would assume there is video out there. If that video ever gets or leaked or sees the light of day, that's another story. But I assume there is video out there. Now, I'm so glad you laid out very well the context of Tano Ortiz and him kind of conditioning the referees. And I think Tata Martino and Messi took exception to that. What you're
Yes,
doing
yes.
right there, if you're Tano Ortiz, is you're conditioning officiating. And you have to understand something about Tano Ortiz and this Monterrey team. Tato Noriega, the president of Monterrey, Tano Ortiz, there's a lot of pressure on this team because they're a massive roster, because of how much money they have, because of what the neighbor is doing. In the time that they've established and bought all these superstars and they built this empire of this rich roster, their neighbor across the way, Tigres, has been winning titles. And they've not just won titles in the last year. They've been doing it for almost 15 years. Since 2011, 14 years, they've been winning titles. They are a dynasty. Tigres is the team that's won multiple championships. They've won international championships in CONCACAF Champions League and now CONCACAF Champions Cup. They've made it to a final of a Club World Cup and lost to, Robert Lewandowski and Hansi Flick's Bayern Munich. They are the standard right now of a top franchise in Mexico, and they continue to be successful. So while you're buying up these players, while you're buying up a coach like Dan Ortiz and stealing them from the top club in Mexico, certainly in terms of popularity and success in Club America, your neighbors picking up trophies. So the pressure mounts, and you have this team, this rich roster that doesn't play like a rich roster, that doesn't punch to their weight. They win, they get by, but they do it in a way that's not aesthetic or pleasing to the general public. So this pressure is mounting, and now you have a situation where Tano Ortiz is conditioning the referees. And Nico Sanchez, who was a longtime captain of Rayados, the Argentine defender, now works within Rayados as a coach, sends his friends this audio, a WhatsApp audio, where he even acknowledges that it may end up surfacing online somewhere, get leaked. And he tells the story about how not only Messi, but Tata Martino were so angry. We're yelling at Tano Ortiz, we're yelling at him, we're yelling at the players, and divulged pretty much the scenario post game. And he says it, and it sounds worse in English, the direct translation, but he says it in Spanish, and he does call Messi a dwarf, which in our culture is very frowned upon, but in Argentine culture is almost a term of endearment. But he says he had to look at the devil, and he was had his fist to his face, and he was ready to pounce, but he wasn't ever going to do anything. He wanted to get a reaction out of Nico Sanchez and Tano Ortiz, and he's telling this story, but the whole time he's saying that he's telling Messi that if it was them that did this, they would get kicked out, that there would be sanctions. But because it's Messi, nothing would happen. So now you're in this scenario where you poke the bear if you're Rayados. Like, the one thing I would never want to see if I'm a direct foe of Messi is an angry Messi. We saw what happened in Qatar. We saw what happened in the World Cup with Louis van Gaal, with the Dutch national team, and how that played out. An angry Messi gets him on a different level. You gave him something to play for. You gave him something to aim for. So now you're going into an environment where there's even more pressure on Rayados. And we need to realize this. For Rayados, their home stadium has been a house of horrors, really, when they needed it most. They've lost a championship in their stadium, a final, to their bitter rival. They've lost to teams they should have beat, whether it's playoffs,
Is that
whether
the
it's
one when
conference
Diego
champions.
Alonso? Is that when Diego Alonso was the coach?
Yeah,
I think so.
yes,
Yes, and then he came
yes.
over. He came over. I think he got fired. I think he
Maybe it
came
was
to Inter
Turco
Miami
Mohamed.
initially. I know that he lost one to them. He lost some game to them that ended up costing him his job there, which is why he was available to come coach
Yeah.
here at the
Not
beginning.
only
It had to
Tigres,
do with
yeah.
that rivalry. Yeah,
Yeah, it's not only
yeah.
Tigres, Michelle. They've lost to Pachuca in games they should have won. They just lost to San Luis last playoffs that they should have won. They've lost to Chivas, just a few weeks ago. This roster, whether it's their first, string, second string, third string, they should beat most teams in Mexico, and yet they don't play to their level, and especially at home. And there's pressure right now because there is an away goal rule in this tournament, and right now
Right.
they hold 2 away goals. But you're playing against Messi. You're playing against Luis Suarez. You're playing against a team that's very top heavy, and if Inter Miami can show some sort of defensive stability, the pressure's on
That's a big
Monterrey.
if. That's a big if. That's a
It
big
is.
because that's been their downfall. Miami, I mean, this game the other day, you talk about an angry Messi. I think angry Messi said after that game, after that whole brouhaha, I think he was basically like, I am playing against Colorado Rapids. I am not sitting one more minute. I mean, he loves to play. Everyone who's watched him knows he wants to play 90 minutes of every game. He had been sitting 4 straight games, didn't get to play that game against Monterrey. It had to be killing him sitting there in that seat. And then with the argument in the hallway afterward, I mean, when he came in that Colorado Rapids game in the second half, it was like, I mean, he's always like this, but there really was a sense he came in electric, like he was supercharged, as charged as he always is. He was supercharged. And then that translates to the whole stadium gets electrified. The whole team gets electrified. When he went out there, every other player that was on that field that had been playing in the first half all of a sudden raised the level and was playing much better the minute he stepped on the field. So you're talking about an angry Messi. Goes out there against Colorado, 12 minutes later scores. The guy hasn't played in 4 games, hasn't played since March 13th. Maybe he's going to be a little rusty. No, he goes out there and 12 minutes later, bam, he scores. Not only scores, makes some beautiful passes, sets up the other goal, Afonso's goal. So, he looks like a man ready to show what he can do, and he elevates the rest of his teammates. All of that said, all of that said, they let up goals at the end of games. They have been the back line has been rotating so much with so many different players, with Noah Allen playing center back and this person playing over here and this one over there. And now they have Weingart, who, he's good, but he's new. He's just started, basically
Cello.
days ago.
Yeah.
So the back line is not like a strong, firm, experienced back line. They're really still trying to figure out how to play together. And like you said, Rayados is a team that has a lot of talent, that has national team players, coming off the bench on that team. So I don't know. I mean, how do you think do you think that Miami has defensively what it takes to be able to make up a 2-goal differential, to score so many goals over there?
Yeah. Does Miami have the offensive firepower? Of course they do. I mean, you look at the numbers, Luis Suarez, what he's done this season. I think he's got like 5 goals in Major League Soccer. He's got like another 4 or 5 assists, something like that. You look at Messi
Yeah.
and 6 goals in all competitions. You look at other players who come on, Campana, etc. They have ways to hurt you. Julian Gressel's been playing very well, regardless of where he plays. Do they have the legs of the midfield to protect that back line? That's the issue. Sergio Busquets, a player that can scan the field and that can change the game for you and be a big difference in possession. But you need somebody with legs next to him. And Federico Redondo was supposed to be that guy.
Yes, and he
Federico
was,
Redondo.
and he started right in the first few games he played. That game against DC, he had a fantastic game against
Yeah.
DC. He really was. He and Busquets were working very, very well together.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
listen,
now they've
I'm old
lost
enough to
him.
remember. Yeah, I'm old enough to remember his father. And if he's half of what his father was, he's going to be a massive success. One of the most elegant, sixes to play the game. A great player in his own right. So he's got that pedigree about him, and he has the legs about him and a massive ceiling, but he's not available. And in Major League Soccer, it's a salary cap league. And it's fine if you're playing within Major League Soccer because you're playing against other teams who have that salary. And maybe that's where there's a leg up for Inter Miami, because you get these superstars who are willing to come in at a discounted rate because it's Miami, because it's next to Messi, et cetera, et cetera. The rest of the world doesn't care about that. Rayados doesn't play with those rules. So the field is not tilted in your favor. So you're going to be top heavy. You're going to have gaps, whether it's in the midfield or whether it's in the back line, that other clubs like Rayados won't have. There are certain things you can play into your advantage. The individual talent you have on the team. Luis Suarez, Jordi Alba, Sergio Busquets, Messi, Julian Gressel to some extent, very good moments where you see the individual brilliance of these players. You have to use pressure against Rayados. And do not forget, Tata Martino and his history with the Mexican fan base is going to come into play here. Tata Martino is not going to want to lose to a Mexican team. Tata Martino, regardless of what he says, left the real sour taste in his mouth from coaching the Mexican national team. He can say whatever he wants, but there isn't anybody who's followed the situation that doesn't see Tata Martino and doesn't see him chomping at the bit to prove himself against a Mexican team. Tano Ortiz has pressure against them. This Rayados team has pressure against them. And this tournament with this away goal rule, if you're playing against a team like Inter Miami with players like Messi, and Messi does something and it takes one goal, they score early, this game changes completely. The complexion of this 90 minutes turns very tense. It turns very frigid for Rayados. Those skeletons in their closet in that stadium start creeping out, and I think this game could be very, very different.
Yeah, I mean it's really exciting. I mean, I just think this particular rivalry, for all the reasons you just said. I mean, Tata Martino, we hadn't even talked about. He has quite a history with the Mexican fans and even with some of the players who have said some things about him in recent weeks that were critical of him. Players on the Monterrey team, other players in Mexico that have criticized the way he coached the team. He definitely does not want to lose to a Mexican team. He definitely wants to win this. And for MLS, how big is it? These, MLS is still trying, even though after all these years, really wants to establish itself as a top league that players want to come from Europe, and they are coming. I mean, now some of them are coming because they want to play with Messi on this team, but they want to attract young talent also from South America, from Central America to come and to play in MLS. And there's a battle, there's a tug of war between Liga MX and MLS for some of these players, for some of these South American players. Are they going to go play in Mexico? Are they going to come play in the United States? How important is it for bragging rights for MLS to get a team to advance to the semifinal of this tournament? How important do you think it is, not just for Inter Miami and Lionel Messi and Tata, but for the league, for Inter Miami representing the league of MLS?
Yeah, so for the longest time, Don Garber would say that Major League Soccer wanted to strive to be a top 5 league, a top 10 league in the world, a top league in the world. And I would sit there and say, try to be the top league in your region. That's what you have to be before you could strive to be a top league in the world. And the reality is, Major League Soccer has not been a top league in the region historically because Liga MX has been in the way. You look at the CONCACAF Champions League, CONCACAF Champions Cup, whatever version of the tournament you would want, and there have only been 3 Major League Soccer teams to win it. 2 of those, DC United and the LA Galaxy, ridiculous teams in their own right, did it on neutral soil or on American soil. Only the Seattle Sounders got through in the actual format. But that's it. You go everywhere else and it's Liga MX, Liga MX, Liga MX, Liga MX, maybe a Saprissa there, sprinkled in its modern day history, but that's it. You have to dominate your region before you could think about global domination. And for Major League Soccer, the success of Inter Miami is critical. This is when the world is watching with this Apple deal, and it's innovative and it's new and it could be the future. But today, Apple isn't as seen or used in the rest of the world like we use it here in the States. It's very common in my household to turn Apple TV on for my kids or for me, for if I want to watch things, or download a movie. That's not the case in the rest of the world. So when you have global rights, when they have global rights and you're behind this paywall, the only way to really see for the rest of the world, Miami, Inter Miami, Major League Soccer, is to see these teams competing at the highest of levels. They need to win the CONCACAF Champions Cup to play in a Club World Cup, a first of its kind World Cup. I've played in this tournament. I've played in the FIFA World Cup, the Club World Cup, excuse me, with Pachuca, and in the format that I played in, it was like an invitational. This is an actual tournament. It's I think, innovative, one of its kind, and to get people to pay attention. And if you want people to pay attention outside of the States, well, Messi's going to be a massive factor in that. Now, it just so happens that Messi's playing in a tournament where probably Liga MX is at its height. And what I mean by that is, if I could specifically choose clubs from Liga MX today, 4 clubs that I want to represent Mexico in Liga MX, I would choose Monterrey, Tigres, America, Pachuca, without a doubt. Guess what? They're in this tournament. If I were to choose 4 clubs for Major League Soccer, there's probably a few clubs that are not even participating in this edition, if not more. That's a reality. The strongest clubs from Mexico are in this tournament, and Messi's got to go through them. But it's critical to the success of Major League Soccer that Messi, Inter Miami represent well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really is. It's a huge tournament, like you said, just for people watching and trying to make opinions of can MLS teams beat, and it's really the dominance of Liga MX over MLS so far. Is it money? I mean,
Yes.
is that the main
Yes.
difference, that they don't have the
Yes.
salary restrictions that MLS has? That's basically, in simplistic terms, is that the bottom line? They just have more flexibility. They're owners who want to spend the money to go out and
So
buy teams.
So I've played on both sides of this rivalry in this competition. And when I was playing for Santos Laguna, we got to 2 finals, 2 CONCACAF Champions League finals, and both we played against this team Rayados, who Inter Miami are going to play against. And along the ways, we would play the Toronto FCs, the Seattle Sounders every year, and other clubs, the other Major League Soccer clubs in group phase or whatever. And I recall the same things happening over and over again. We would play in the States, and they would be somewhat competitive games. And, a 1-1 tie or a 2-1 loss for us, when we're playing in Seattle. But as soon as you come into Mexico, as soon as they played us in El TCM, El Corona, in Mexican soil, whether we had guys who, and this is really what happens, in that time, there was maybe 1 through 7 players who you say could compete, but then 8 through 11 were maybe not at the level that you would need to play internationally. So those 7 players, you really needed them to have a good run of form, a good run of health, no injuries, availability to be on their best day, et cetera, because if not, you'd play a man down. And it was when we played in Mexico, we'd come away with these scandalous score lines on the semifinal, beating the Seattle Sounders I think like a 6-1 global or 6-2 global scoreline. Toronto FC the same. You would see these, deer in the headlights type of looks from some of these players. Now that 1 through 7 number has gotten stronger. You could probably say now, because of the inclusion of TAM, the designated player, the U22 initiative, that 11 gets stronger. But you still have that middle of the roster where if a player is injured, he's ill, it's a bad run of form, not available for whatever the case may be, you have to dig into that bench. You have to dig into that depth. And that depth only gets stronger with money. That depth only gets stronger with finances. That 11 only gets stronger. That talent pool only gets bigger with money. And Liga MX has it. I heard Caleb Porter talking about facing Club America. It's like facing 11 DPs, except guess what? Nobody else around the world uses that statement about DPs. They just have money to pay their players. So the top, teams around the world are because they spend money. And I think we're starting to see those purse strings loosen. I know there's a board of governors meeting here in Los Angeles later today, and maybe we get some news about what could potentially open up for Major League Soccer down the road. But as of today, the difference between the 2 leagues, besides its massive history, because there's a leg up for Mexican clubs. They've been around for almost 100 years. Some of these clubs. I played for Pachuca. It's over 100 years old. Played for Puebla. It's almost 80 years old. They not only have the history and popularity, but they got the money to back those teams up. You need money. You need to spend.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that really is the difference. And yes, this meeting, I know Jorge Mas, I mean, the MLS is, it's basically divided. There's two camps of owners. There's the Jorge Mas group of owners. They want to open things up and just say, let's do it. Let's spend money. Let's try, because now you have Saudi Arabia too. You not only are competing with Mexico for getting top talents, in addition to Europe, of course, but now Saudi Arabia is throwing around huge amounts of money. And when you talk about the depth of the team, when I look at Inter Miami, the team, yes, it was a league game the other day, but there were five players who started. They started kind of a second team against Colorado for the first half. Five of those players made under $80,000 a year. Those are young players, players who came up through the academy, and they're putting them out there on the field in a real game, that matters. And they're doing their best. They really are. And I'm not saying that they're not talented, they don't deserve to play, whatever. But when you're going up against a team like Monterrey, and Miami does have a long string of injuries. I mean, Campana came off the field the other day with a little slight injury. I don't know what his situation is going to be for the game. So, Miami has a bunch of guys who have been injured, particularly hamstring injuries, which are dangerous injuries. If they come out and they run around just a little bit and they feel it, they're coming right off. You're going up against a team that has so much depth, like Monterrey, in Mexico. You've just talked about before about the intimidation factor of just being in that stadium, in that environment, with a team where every single player from top to bottom, makes more top to bottom than the Inter Miami team. So yeah, Miami is top heavy. Miami has the Mount Rushmore. I call them, the big four, the Mount Rushmore. They're there. They have Messi, they have Busquets, they have Alba, they have Suarez. That's an amazing quartet. I never in a million years thought that they would play for Inter Miami or all play together on an MLS team, but they've got a really, really big challenge. And the tempers may flare and someone may get thrown out of this game. I mean, there could be some yellow cards in this game. There could be a red card in this game. I don't know from which side or both sides, but this could be a game where people's tempers are going to get in the way.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think emotion is going to play a massive factor here. I think the pressure for both sides, somebody's going to burst, whether that's in the Inter Miami side, dealing with the pressure like we saw with Ruiz and what I thought were two silly cards, or Monterrey dealing with the pressure at home in front of your fans in a game you're supposed to win, regardless of if it's Messi, Luis Suarez. You have a 2-1, aggregate scoreline right now with two away goals, playing at home with a much stronger squad. Now, certainly players like Suarez and Messi and Alba and Busquets will tilt certain things in your favor, but football is a sport where you can exploit weaknesses and exploit holes. And if you don't have a strong 11, it's not going to go well for you. You're playing against a team that's got a lot of rich players. If I look at the last lineup that Rayados put out against, Inter Miami in Miami, I don't think there's one player that wouldn't be considered a DP in Major League Soccer because of what they make. And we're talking about net versus gross. So these guys make net. And that includes some of the guys who came off the bench. This is a game where I think styles make fights. That's the saying. This is a great fight for both. And there's a lot to play for both. But because there's so much to play for, I think emotions will be pretty high. And you could see a bit of a bloodbath here.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, and I'm excited. I can't wait for this game. I'm ready. I'm like ready to. I'm ready to watch right now. Just getting this great background, history, perspective from both leagues, from a player and commentator who has really lived it, not just watched it as a fan, but you have lived it. You've been on the field in this very competition with teams from both leagues. I mean, really, I really appreciate it. And I know everybody who's watching and listening to this podcast, we'll go into this game now with such a better understanding of what we're going into on Wednesday night. Yeah, you had something else
Yes,
you
if
wanted to
I could
say.
just if I could just add one thing, is the other wrinkle in this is the ever-growing rivalry between Mexico and the US at the national team level, and the dominance of the US men's national team as of late. I think 2019 is the last time that the US men's national team lost to Mexico, and that was in a friendly in New Jersey, a 3-0 friendly. Javier Hernandez, Chicharito Hernandez's last goal with the Mexican national team. That adds a different type of pressure to the Mexican clubs. There's been a dominance at the international level. Fans do not forget that, and they want to see their dominance at the club level. They want to see Major League Soccer not only go down, but in humiliating fashion. That's another layer of pressure here for the Mexican clubs, whether it be Rayados, Tigres, uh, America, Pachuca. They want to show that while things may be changing on the national and the international level, that top dog in this region is still Liga MX. That's not lost upon these players or these fans.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Just the whole USA versus Mexico, Edri versus USA, just all of that plays into this. And then the whole Tata, and how interesting too that their coach is also from Argentina. Their coaching staff is also an Argentine dominated staff, arguing with Messi, the Argentine icon. I mean, it's just there's so much here. It is really a telenovela. I mean, I have to agree with Tata on this. It really is a telenovela, and we're waiting for the next episode right now. The next episode is coming up very soon, and we know that everyone watching this podcast and listening to this podcast is going into the game now ready. We know everything now. We know the background. We know what it feels like to play on both teams, both sides, both leagues. And thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to plug again. If you enjoyed what you heard today, which I'm sure you did, he does this all the time with Football Americas, which is a show on ESPN Plus with Sebastian Salazar. When is the show? When does it drop?
So we do Monday and Thursdays, 5:30 Pacific, 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. You could also find me on ESPN Deportes, Monday through Friday, out on Nunca. And also I have a podcast called Vamos and the Men in Blazers Network. We actually had Julian Gressel on, and he shared some brilliant stories about Busquets and Jordi Alba and Messi in the locker room, which I thought were pretty cool.
All right, great. So now lots of places to hear him and see him. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us at Inside Inter Miami. By the way, I usually do the pistolero. I did not do it because Luis Suarez did not play this last game, but we do have the looking up at the sky Leo Messi celebration. He did score, and I know he's going to want to score more against Monterrey. And we will assume that Luis Suarez will also be out there with him. So it should be a very exciting match. So if you're watching from home, grab your popcorn or whatever you eat during games and have a wonderful time. Enjoy. And thank you so much for joining this podcast, for watching, listening, and we will see you again next week.